Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I'm excited for my conversation today with Wanda Toro Turini. She is also known as Dr. Wanda, the nerdy girl entrepreneur. And she is a seasoned entrepreneur. She's celebrating 16 years of business, or I like to say 16 years of being proudly unemployable. And she has invented quite a few products, which we're going to dive into today, platforms, so to speak. Her latest brainchild is called Catchwords, helps fellow entrepreneurs unveil their anonymous fans. I love that. And stop leaving money on the table. She is, of course, a unique combo of super analytical and super creative, and is a rock star in both marketing and audience engagement. Welcome to the show today, Wanda.
Yay. Thank you so much. I am very excited to be on your show.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. Of course, we're telling the backstory, even before you became an entrepreneur. Talk about kind of some of the early choices you made, education, early career, and if you can work in there too. And he mentioned, did you grow up in an entrepreneurial family? Or I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs where they're like, no one in my family was an entrepreneur. I just jumped out on a limb. So talk about that a bit, if you would too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share the story. I think in my family, I believed that I didn't have entrepreneurs in my life. So my parents were not entrepreneurs, and none of my aunts and uncles and such. But what was interesting is, in retrospect, my grandfather, who lived in Puerto Rico, and my great grandfather, they were both entrepreneurs. They were farmers, and they would sell produce, and one owned like a bar / like grocery store and that kind of stuff. But I didn't really have exposure to that influence. So what's kind of interesting is, in retrospect, I wonder, well, is there something in the blood,
Yes, exactly.
that even without the influence, it was kind of there. But what's interesting, I grew up in New York, and I was born in the Bronx, and probably at around age 4 to 5, my parents and my father decided that he did not want his children to grow up in the city that they remembered. They grew up in Hell's Kitchen. And so he said, I want something a little bit different. And so he moved us up to upper state New York, not the true upstate, but Dutchess County, Orange County area, for those of you who know New York. But it was basically an hour and a half to 2 hours away from New York City. And we were in the city all the time. So I always have that metropolitan influence. But the big thing is, my dad worked really, really, really hard. I mean, nobody in his sphere went to college. When he mentioned that, to his mom, it was like, good luck. You're not staying here. That's not what people do, around here. Go get a job of some sort. So my background was just really exposed to my dad just working his butt off all the time. But what was most impressive was he was actually a correctional officer at one point. I mean, he's had a lot of jobs in his life, but I remember when he was a corrections officer, and he finally said to himself, there's got to be more than this for me. And he decided to go back to college. Wow. I'm like 6-7 years old, and he's going back to college, and he would go to school during the day, and then he would be in corrections at night, and obviously doing whatever work he needed to do, and trying to do his studies and his work and his homework and write papers and such while he was working as a correctional officer. And I remember, well, not remember, just recently he was telling me stories of all the people that criticized him and said, what do you think? Who do you think you are, trying to get out of this? You're kind of stuck, you're stuck in this. And he vowed that he wouldn't be. And so I guess seeing that tenacity, like I witnessed that process and didn't fully appreciate what it was, because from my perspective, it's like dad's not around, right? And he's always stressed out, and he would literally commute to New York City. And even though it was an hour and a half to 2 hours away, sometimes it would be 3 hours plus one way because of traffic and stuff like that. And so he would come home very cranky. So my perspective of it was like, man, that sucks. He's working his butt off and he's never with us. And then I remember this point where my dad decided that he finally wanted to own something of his own. We always rented apartments, and he always talked about owning his own little castle. And he put all of us, my mom, my brother and I, in a car, and he drove us to this junkyard. Basically, that's what it would look like to me. And we drove up to a mobile home that needed a lot of fixing. And he said, here it is. This is our little castle. And he was so happy. And I was mortified. I was like probably around 11 at the time. And I'm like, holy crap. Like, this is not like our apartment, and he's like, it needs work. It needs painting and this and that. And he was like, but I'm going to tell you one thing, location. Right now, this is where you see it, but we're going to rent a nice little plot of land. We're going to make sure he actually picked it out. It's on the end of the lot of it was 10 mobile homes. But we have the end lot so we can build a garden and have a fence and all of this stuff. And so I know it's a long story around my dad, but it's like very influential, to see this process, his pride of ownership and what he had to do to finally get his castle, which was this mobile home. And, and I'm embarrassed about how embarrassed I was back then. But, being 11, 12, 13, it's like, ugh.
That's an impressionable age where you're worried about what other people, you start to really worry about it. Or at least I did, kind of the perception of things.
Yeah. But the message and the pride of finally having ownership. And you know what? My dad was right about location, because that mobile home, I think, he may have bought it for less than $10,000. I feel like it was maybe $6,000, $7,000. He bought it for, and he put it on that lot, and we built a fence and we painted it and we put the skirting on it and we built a garden and a shed and all these things to make it homey. And he sold it for $20,000. Actually, he would correct me. It was $19,999. And that's unheard of for a mobile home, because mobile homes are considered to depreciate like a vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it was a very interesting process. Yeah.
Yeah. So Wanda, talk about some of the early choices you made in education and career path.
Yeah. Well, so the biggest thing is my perspective was that I didn't want to have money be a struggle like it was when I was younger. And so what's the traditional path, right? They teach us to go to school as long as possible, basically. And so I went and got my doctorate in pharmacy, and I loved working with patients, but there was something that was still dissatisfying. I was always the one that had the ideas of how to improve process in the hospital and this and that. And I recognized that was pretty annoying to other people. But in my mind, I just always saw problems and an opportunity to solve them. And it was just this thing that happened in my brain. I had the opportunity from Novartis actually to do a fellowship with them, which was interesting, a fellowship in marketing. And I pretty much had thought that any interest in going into the business world was gone and having a doctorate in the medical field. But they gave me the opportunity to bridge over and use that in healthcare marketing. And from the people at Novartis, I was able to learn from really, really seasoned marketers. I was super lucky. I worked in the oncology division, so for cancer drugs, and in the pharmaceutical space, the marketers that work on specialized products have a lot of marketing experience. So it's something that you ascend to. So I was fortunate to like pretty much come out of my doctorate degree and do a fellowship with these really brilliant marketers. And that was really the beginning of me understanding business, but understanding how my problem solving skills just started fitting there. But I will say that the whole time of my life, I have always felt I was a little weirdo. I just couldn't help. It was like computer brain. A problem would occur and literally like my brain would go through 5 bazillion different scenarios of how we could solve it and like, whittle it down. And it got to the point where it was pretty annoying. I would call it like a disease, really. And so that was frustrating for me. And, me and all my brilliant ideas, Novartis was really great at keeping me as long as possible. But I finally had to step away and say, I need to give some of these ideas life. Like I was still being suffocated being in this corporate environment where I couldn't just test things out. And the big clincher for me though was, even though I was making really, really good money, yeah. very, very good money at Novartis, and they treated me very well. But I was on a leadership track to start managing a team. Mm-hmm. And I realized, wow, if I'm not happy where I am, I'm not going to be a great boss.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was one of the major switches for me. The second switch was that the woman I was mentoring after, she's an amazing woman, but she was traveling all the time. Mm. And we had one event, I remember, where her husband and her children were at the event, and the way they interacted wasn't how I want to interact with my kids. It seems like she was away a lot, let's say. Mm-hmm. And that really hurt me. I said, you know what, when I have children, I want my kids to know me. I want to be there. And if I become a bigwig executive at this pharmaceutical company, I'm going to be away from my family. And I wasn't even married then. I wasn't, but I thought this isn't what I wanted. So that's basically what was the catalyst for me to decide to start playing around with some of my ideas, but ultimately to try and create freedom so that ultimately I could be available for a family that was coming in the future.
And you do have a family now?
I do have a family now, but I have a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. But I didn't realize how much of a struggle it was going to be for me. I'm 50 years old. I just turned 50. So, I had with a lot of medical help. Oh. I had a 5-year-old at age 44 going to 45 and a 1-year-old at 49 going to 50. So, so yeah, it's, a function of delaying, just life in general, right? Prioritizing career and such, and also really waiting for the right person. But I'm so happy because I definitely met the right person, and we got married when I was age 40.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Thank you for letting me pry a bit.
Yeah.
So, you had all these ideas. I'm sure you saw, as you mentioned, lots of sort of gaps in the market. So over the last 16 years, you've launched several products. And what's interesting to me is, I can definitely, reading some of the things and watching some of your videos, I can truly see you're like, okay, that needs to be fixed. That needs to be fixed. That needs to be fixed.
Exactly.
So I'm assuming, so we'll talk about ecoFiles specifically. I want to start with that because I would imagine, what I'm seeing is when you left Novartis, you were on the sales side, and this conversation you have when you go in to see a doctor, and you perhaps, they sort of prescribe you either some sort of medication or some sort of lifestyle change or whatnot. And they're, handing you a bunch of pamphlets, and, it's like, it's kind of overwhelming, or they maybe can't find said pamphlets. I've been in that situation where my doctor is like rifling through drawers in the exam room trying to find the right thing. And so what you came up with is obviously brilliant to take that step of the process out and create something that is more eco-friendly. So if you would talk about the inception of that.
Yeah. So back in 2007, I was actually at a major oncology cancer conference. And what's interesting is at the end of the conference, I had a little 10 by 10 booth. So, I'm here breaking down my little booth, and I get to see the behind the scenes of a huge 50,000 person conference at McCormick Place in Chicago, which is humongous for anybody that knows. So they're breaking everything down, and they're collecting all of the paper brochures in the center of the exhibit hall. And this, Felina, is a human climbable mountain of brochures. It was really like, whoa. And I looked at it, and of course my brain, there's a problem with this, right? Not eco-friendly. But on top of that, we spend a lot of money, and especially in the healthcare industry, I'm like, wow, we spend a lot of money printing up these brochures. And as a pharmacist, I actually thought, we're printing up these patient education brochures, for example. We don't know the patients that pick them up, if patients even pick them up. If there's an update, we have no way of recommunicating with these patients. It's just a disservice. The way the paper brochure works is a disservice. It's outdated the moment it gets printed. And so I looked at the waste there. And then when we think of ourselves as consumers of these paper brochures, how many times have we picked up these brochures that we feel are actually valuable, but it's so inconvenient and it just gets lost. I even think of like the instruction manuals for all the things that we buy and stuff, right? It's just inconvenient to keep. But that very day I said, look, we need to create a solution for this problem. It's not eco-friendly what we're doing here. All of that stuff was being thrown out, by the way. It wasn't being recycled. But on top of that, from a marketing perspective, we have no metrics. We have no way of reconnecting with those people or giving them an update. And as a consumer, it's just very inconvenient. And that day in 2007, I called it ecoFiles, but I didn't know what ecoFiles was going to be. It took us 2 years to look at different types of technology. And we actually settled on texting because we realized that texting was ubiquitous, no matter what kind of cell phone you had. If it was a smartphone or an old clamshell phone, if you were US or international, everybody could text, and you didn't have to download a special app, right? It was just part native, part of the phone. And so we said, wouldn't it be cool to be able to text a keyword that is associated with this piece of information, and we would email it to that person, and then we would have their contact information. So when there's an update, we could actually email an update. And all of this was healthcare driven to me because my background was in healthcare. And even when I left Novartis, I was serving large healthcare organizations. That was my primary client base. And so I created this, and I introduced it to large organizations, and they were like, wow, this is great, but only children text, only teenagers.
What?
Yeah. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, kids are texting their parents, and parents will text the grandparents, and it's happening. It's coming. Like, prepare. And I couldn't sell it to anybody. Oh. And I spent a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because I really believed in it. Luckily, the business that I had prior to that, it was doing well. And I kept on like sprinkling like our profits into this, and total dud. And so I was crushed, and I put it on the digital shelf. And in 2011, I started speaking in front of live audiences for another one of my businesses, a consulting firm. And I said, wait a second, I really it's very annoying when you give a great presentation and you could see the people with the twinkle in their eye and they're taking pictures of your slides and they're writing your notes and they're anonymous to me. I don't know who they are. And as an entrepreneur, we can't afford to lose those people.
Yeah.
And that's when I brought up that technology that was intended to be eco-friendly. I brought it up to catch those anonymous fans. And I offered, the very first time I offered my slides, 25% of my audience texted for my slides. And I was like, whoa, I am on to something. And that is how I converted what was a platform intended for something else. I think some of us need to realize that, like, we need to listen to the marketplace, what they're ready for, especially if you're a visionary type entrepreneur. Right. It gets frustrating when the market doesn't see what you see.
It's so true. And I want to pause on that real quick, because obviously I want to get into the platform that you have now, but when do you know? This is like the $1 billion question for entrepreneurs, right? Like, when do you know to pivot, or when do you know when to walk away, or when do you know, to just keep going? I've been asked that question, what feels like thousands of times in the last 20 years. How would you answer that?
When you start to learn
easy question.
Yeah.
I'm teasing.
I would say it was when I started to learn to listen. So I felt that the path had to be what I envisioned from the beginning. Like, being visionary, it's like, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be eco-friendly. All brochures will eventually go away. Why would people want to pick up a brochure? It was just like, I saw what it could be, and it became frustrating when people didn't understand. And then I had to kind of shut off like my brain a little bit and just listen to where people were currently, and not give up on it. It doesn't mean to give up on it. It just means that maybe the path is a little different than what you expected it to be, but you ultimately want to keep your mind on that end goal, right? It's like your GPS, you set your destination, but guess what? It's like you go on a couple detours, but if you keep your destination set, then ultimately you're going to get there, but you have to have the patience. So if you get a lot of detours, either you could be really frustrated and fight it and then just be like, screw it, we're just going to like abandon ship. Like, this is ridiculous. Or you enjoy the journey.
Yeah, that's right? Great advice. Yeah.
And so that's been a difficult path. It's not easy, but when you're reminded to enjoy the journey, to listen a little bit better to the market, and realize that they're not telling you necessarily that your idea, your method sucks. It's just that it's, they may not be ready for it the way you're envisioning it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm guessing, I haven't been in your industry, but just as an observer and a customer, getting certain markets to change their behavior, doctors, for example,
yes,
I can imagine is not always easy.
Yeah. So, I'll give an example around that, just to be transparent. So, my heart around healthcare and knowing how transformational it will be, not it could be, but it will be, when inherently patients are prescribed medication and prescribed education. That's my goal. And so I created this program called the InfoScript, and giving these healthcare professionals, I found physicians and nurse practitioners tended to be really responsive to this in the cancer space, cancer education space, and to give them the power to actually prescribe education to their patients. Because when we get a diagnosis, and especially a cancer diagnosis, we very often wind up going on the internet. But what happens is we can really bump into a lot of bad resources. And so we would clearly expect our healthcare professional to link us to something, but that doesn't necessarily happen. So that's my desire, because once somebody gets prescribed education, then then you have a connection to that patient. So now they're not left alone, and you could connect them to community and all these things versus having the patient have to search. And when you have a diagnosis like cancer, sometimes you or your family may just be shot. You're going to lose the drive to continue to search for new information potentially. And I think you could serve patients better if you actually proactively can provide that information. But it's been difficult to change the behavior of doctors and nurses, and I haven't given up on that. But that is, in you bringing it up, that's why I actually decided to first start, well, not first, but to pivot and focus on catchwords for entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurs are more open to innovation and changes and shifts in the paradigm, right? And so my goal was, let's get things up and running with entrepreneurs so that people get comfortable with what a catchword is, and then hopefully continue to influence doctors and nurses to be more comfortable with texting. But that has been a difficult journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am glad you have extended your platform into supporting entrepreneurs. So for anybody who's listening, who is a speaker, whether it's digital, of course, and these days we may be speaking at a conference, but it may be via Zoom, right? Or as we start to come back into person, I know I've been in that situation too, where you do want to connect with your audience, but the organizer isn't going to hand you the email list of attendees necessarily, right? And so this idea where folks can simply text in, explain that catchword, idea of a catchphrase. How does that work exactly as far as the technology?
Sure. So essentially we own 411321, and also and that's for people within the US to text to. So that's the phone number, quote unquote, that they would text to. And then we also have a long code, which is known as a regular phone number, but the +1 909 741 1321. And we're actually adding ourselves to WhatsApp too. So in the near future, we will be on WhatsApp, but that was put together for international audiences. But basically, when people text a word that you have registered, that you have licensed to be yours, to one of our numbers, then it triggers our system to ask for your email address, and then it delivers a text, an HTML email. That means a really nicely designed, professionally looking email, and an attachment. So this is very different because in the past couple of years, texting has been starting to be utilized in speaking engagements. But what's unique to our platform is that we deliver an email with an attachment. So when people come back from a conference and there's tons of emails to go through, what do we prioritize? I mean, we prioritize something definitely that has an attachment, right? Yeah. And so everything that we've done, I mean, remember, I have a science background. I'm a super nerd. So I have analyzed the heck out of this. I mean, for me, it got to the point where when I was presenting and using a catchword, consistently 76% of my audience would text every time I spoke. And I was able to get to that with strategy, really. So my main message is to say, hey, you have the texting platform, and ours is still proprietary. There's no system out there that does what we do turnkey, right? But there's nothing that beats the strategy that you wrap around a technology, because then that's how you really optimize the heck out of it. And that's what we do. We offer it as an agency. Nobody can go on a platform and sign up for Catch and just do their own catchword, because I want every single catchword to have a high value experience for the audience. And so we kind of work as the gatekeepers. This is, I think it comes from my corporate and my healthcare background, where my intention is for us to serve the audience. And so if you know that somebody has a catchword, they've gone through a rigorous process of figuring out how they can expand or extend the impact of their talk, their appearance. It could be a media appearance, obviously a podcast interview, a speaking engagement, in all of those cases. So that's what the experience is. And I actually have something for those folks that actually do speak, if I may offer it.
Yeah, please.
So if you are a service-minded and an impact-driven entrepreneur, that's really important, because the core strategy around this is extending the service of your appearance, right? I want to say no more to those charity talks. We help you make those talks worth it. And every one of those appearances should literally be a lead generating machine. So what I put together was the core of the strategies that I used on how to transform your talk into a lead gen machine. And I'd love to offer it to anybody who this resonates with. And all you have to do is text leads, LEADS, to 411321. That's LEADS is the message, to 411321 as the phone number, and it'll ask you for your email address, and then we'll send you this PDF. And if you're international, you could text leads to +1 909 741 1321, and you'll get the same thing. And hopefully you'll start the process of actually stopping the charity talks and actually making your appearances valuable for you and the audience.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, I always like to wrap up with how can our listeners get in touch with you, but you just did it. So that's perfect.
Yeah. And actually in this particular case, I also uniquely give a link to my calendar, which is a little tight, but if you do text leads to 411321, you will have the opportunity to see like what your audience can experience, but then you could also just get on my calendar and kind of talk through what your visibility plan is, and we could see how we can support you.
I love it. That is awesome. Well, I am excited to see the platform in action. I do a fair bit of speaking myself, and this is, you're right, it is always the persistent annoyance that people walk away and you're like, wait.
Yes, that will no longer be the case. My goal is for Catchword to be a standard offer for any talk. I mean, they do it in healthcare. It doesn't feel salesy at all, and we ensure that it's actually super high value for the audience. So it winds up working really well for everybody.
That is great. And for those who are listening, the website is KETCHWORDS, catchwords.com. And Wanda, if folks just want to reach out to you through the website initially, can they do that as well?
Yes, they can definitely go to Catchwords, or you could find me, Wanda Toro Turini, on Facebook. I love to chat, and you could watch my crazy life.
You have some cool videos. You are
Thank
awesome.
you.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.